Welcome back to Russell Street Replay. I'm your host, Nikhil Mehta. With me is Russell Street Report's Jared Pinder. Jared, great to have you back on the pod. It's been a rainy day here in Baltimore, and it's definitely nice to finally talk some football. How are you feeling about this weekend's matchup with the Browns?
Man, it's definitely going to be generating a lot of buzz. A little bit weird that we get to play on a afternoon on a Saturday, but I think this is the first time the NFL will be having games on a Saturday, and I am definitely very excited to face the Browns. They have a new quarterback, as we will get into, and I think it's going to be a pretty interesting matchup.
Yeah, we played them earlier this season. Give a quick recap of that game. The Ravens won 23-20. It wasn't a particularly fun to watch game. They ran the ball 44 times for 160 yards. Lamar Jackson completed just 9 passes for 120 yards. But the Ravens came out with the win, mostly on the back of some solid defense, recovered a few fumbles. And but still, the Browns were able to move the ball through the air. Jacoby Brissett passed for 258 yards, but rushed for 113. Nick Chubb did average 5.7 yards a carry. It's definitely going to be something to look out for. But what I really remember about that game is how it ended, which was the last 4 drives are fumble by the Ravens. That was the Justice Hill fumble, I believe, by Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who is not playing this game. Fumble. The Browns missed a field goal. The Ravens went 3 and out with inside of 2 minutes, and then punted the ball back to Cleveland. They just couldn't they just couldn't get into field goal range time. Very, very ugly end of the game, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at here. And I think that the Ravens are a bit healthier this game, so I think they're positioned to play a bit cleaner of a game. But like you said, it's also somewhat of a different Browns team that we're playing. Where we haven't seen much Deshaun Watson. We've only seen 2 games of him this season, and it's not really clear what to expect from him as he kind of starts to gel and fit in the offense more. It definitely does feel like a quarterback being dropped into an offense in the middle of a season. There were some people who thought that he would come back and just be how he was in Houston in 2020, and that's obviously not going to be the case. So what are you looking for in this matchup with Watson this weekend?
I'm going to be looking for the turnover-worthy plays. The Ravens had 3 turnovers last week against the Steelers. Deshaun Watson has not been seeing the field very well, as you mentioned. I mentioned in this week's Out to Lunch that I did for a Russell Street Report that the one play I've really locked in on was, I think it was a play where Watson has a clean pocket. He sees the deep cross coming over like the deep middle of the field. He sees it, but he pumps, doesn't release. He hesitates, and because he hesitates, he panics. He tries to run around, then he throws it into double coverage. Jesse Bates picks it off. That's the thing that I think he needs to, that like we're gonna be looking at, is that he's clearly seeing stuff get open. He's seeing it, but it's that 2-second hesitation that is killing him right now. And Deshaun Watson did make some plays in last week's game. It seems like that as the game went on, he started to get a little bit more comfortable. He started to extend plays. He got out of bad pockets. He made a decent throw on the run. Deshaun Watson is still very capable of making plays. But I think the issue with him is just the turnovers, in which the Ravens forced 3 of them, and that's the one thing I'm going to be looking for in terms of their defense, our defense versus their offense, is that I'm looking for the turnovers, man.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know, like you're saying about Watson, like the traits are still there. The physical skills are still there. He's not like, it wasn't that long of an absence. He, obviously found some way to take care of himself in that time. And, I think that the Ravens are actually do pretty well against those Tracy quarterbacks. It's really a question of how much his processing is coming back, how much his ability to, put together drives, lead in offense, break down a defense. And I think if the Ravens had played him, played against the Deshaun Watson in that first game, I'm going to look right now to double check some of the absences. But, I think that was one of the first games without Marcus Williams. I don't know. That was before. I think that was without. We had Houston. That was just after we signed Jason Pierre-Paul. I mean, you still had Pepe in the slot. Devin Kennard's getting a bunch of snaps in that game. Like, it wasn't. I think we're a healthier team now. I think everyone's kind of back to full strength, and so having a healthier defense means I think we won't throw the same defense at the Browns passing wise, and I think that's good. I don't want Watson to be able to study up on the defense that we played Brissett, because again, they're two pretty different quarterbacks. I think that Brissett's kind of a get her done kind of guy, like let me keep the chains moving. A very interesting career, whereas Watson is, supposed to be one of these elite quarterbacks. He's supposed to be able to just dice up offenses and make plays on the run, like you were saying. And so I don't see him doing that in this matchup. I do think that obviously the Ravens really, both Marcus Peters and their third cornerback, if it's a slot guy, those are weaker areas. Marlon Humphrey had a weaker week last week. Saying week a bunch of times. Marlon Humphrey had a down week, I should say. And I think I would expect him to bounce back, but I still think that Peters and whoever's in the slot are going to be potentially exploitable. The thing is the Browns don't have, so many weapons. I think this game it's going to more come down to defending Njoku than it is defending, Donovan Peoples-Jones or whoever their third receiver is, for example.
Yeah, definitely. I think the big thing for their defense is obviously going to be limiting the big plays and the tackling. Obviously, we know what Nick Chubb can do. We know that he is at most, you have to say he's a top 3 running back. I don't think you can put him any lower than 3, potentially even 2. So he's definitely one of the best running backs in football. He's going to make some plays. Obviously, you mentioned of the new team that we have. Well, this time we have Roquan Smith.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have a healthy Marcus Williams. We're going to be having Kyle Hamilton, and Kyle Hamilton played in the last Browns matchup, but
I think so, but not as much. I mean, that was early. The Ravens. I mean, this is the kind of matchup, and early in the season where maybe you don't want to put him in the entire game on Njoku, who's a veteran tight end, but you're like, okay, I'm pretty comfortable with how he's doing. Anytime David Njoku splits out to the slot, I want Hamilton going to pick up that matchup. Like, I do think that is still a difference in this game.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing for them is going to be the tackling. Like, they got to tackle better. The tackling issues came up in Pittsburgh. Like, they really came up, despite the fact that they didn't give up that many points. The tackling issues did scare me a little bit. Like, they had a 3rd and long situation, and they allowed. They allowed a big 3rd down conversion late in the game because they missed they were missing tackles over the place. I need sacks to be finished. I need big plays finished. If this team's going to make a lot of noise in the playoffs, which I think me and you both hope they can do, but we need plays to get finished. We can't have busted plays. We can't have bad tackling. We can't have quarterback slipping out of sacks. We just can't have that. We need to finish.
Yeah, but I think that this defense has made major strides towards that. It happens every year, right? They get better as the year goes on. Tackling that happens for most NFL teams. The Ravens are no different. Having Roquan Smith, as you mentioned, goes a long way. And earlier I was really, I was talking a lot about the passing game, trying to match up with, trying to shut down Watson, matching up with Amari Cooper. I think is going to be one of the main matchups to watch. But like you said, the Browns' bread and butter really is, and should be, I should say, should be their run game. It's not. They've really tried to throw the ball a lot since Watson came back, to try and get him into the rhythm and, getting their offense going, whatever. But, to win games, you have to go to your strength. And I think that the Browns really have a strong offensive line. Chubb the Ravens always give Chubb a tough game, but he never backs down from it. And I think that he's the kind of guy that you can't wear down. He's the kind of guy that wears you down going into the fourth quarter. And that's, to me, where I'm most worried about this game is, like you said, those big runs, Chubb breaking off one of those big runs in the second half. And I think that's where, the defensive rotations, that's where going to be sustaining drives is going to be important. And that's something Huntley is actually pretty good at doing, partially because he loves averaging exactly 4 yards of play. And so, every time it'll be 4th and 2 every time and we'll go for it. So, I don't know if the Ravens defense is necessarily set up to pitch a shutout, partially just because of what they're dealing with on offense, which we can get to in a minute. But I do think that you force Chubb to run into the teeth of your defense. You force him to run at Queen and Smith, who are just playing out of their minds right now. And you just hope that by the end of the game, you kind of win the battle of attrition. I think that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. like you mentioned, it's just about, can you be able to, with a backup quarterback, get into these dogfights? Can you go into these messy, ugly games, and somehow, some way, you get a couple of turnovers. Maybe you do get a couple of maybe you do get a have a play like what happened last time, where Patrick Queen has two back-to-back tackles for loss, and you back the Browns up all the way back in their end zone. It's like, can you get those plays on defense to support an offense that is trying to survive with Tyler Huntley? That's what I think is going to be very important. Last week they were able to get those plays because mainly they were playing a backup quarterback in Mitchell Trubisky. So can they make Watson look like Mitchell Trubisky? I don't know. I guess we're just gonna have to find out.
Yeah, and the Steelers were able to move the ball through the air against the Ravens last week. Part of that again was an uncharacteristically tough game from Marlon Humphrey. I don't expect that to happen again. I'd be really surprised if it did. And so but you're still somewhat like, okay, this pass defense isn't perfect. It is very much reliant on forcing turnovers. I think interceptions, forcing fumbles is what makes this pass defense, and that it's tougher to get pressure on Watson. With against Cleveland, I'm going to look now to see how many times we got pressure on him in the first game. I mean, we got 19 pressures on Brissett in the first game, 5 sacks, which is a pretty solid number. I'm definitely like, if the Ravens can replicate that. I think that kind of pressure is what forces the turnovers down the field, and gets the Browns out of positions where they're handing off to Chubb a lot, right? Part of the thing with runs, and we know this with the Ravens, it's, explosive runs aren't common, but they will come eventually. Well, you'll wear them down, you'll hit your blocks eventually, and the Ravens know that. The Browns are kind of the same way, but if you can just get them out of a position where they're able to run the ball consistently on first and second down, I think that's going to be key. And so it's kind of a cliche getting out to a lead, but I think especially so where with Huntley, where you can't be in a position where you're passing your way back into this game. You can lean on a drive or two, you can run a 2-minute drill before the half if you need to, but it can't be a kind of game where you're coming out of the half, and Cleveland gets the ball to start the second half and they go up 10, 14, 17 points and you're staring at that deficit, because that's when Chubb's just going to take over at that point. So I think offensively then, kind of looking at the offensive side of the ball, what are your some of your keys to the game? Where do you think the Ravens are going to have to excel? I know one key point's obviously going to be the Browns having a poor rushing defense, and the Ravens running game really starting to get going at this point in the year. Like it seems to every year, they're just running at such a great clip right now. I don't know how many yards per carry they averaged last game, but Dobbins is back. If Kevin Zeitler's back in this lineup, and pretty much any lineup with Stanley, Linderbaum, and Kevin Zeitler is going to be absolutely great run blocking. So, I think that's the main thing to watch. What other matchups are you looking for?
Yeah, like you mentioned, I think the matchup that I'm really looking for is going to be this Browns front versus our offensive line. Last time they played, I was actually kind of disappointed with the run blocking. The Browns have one of the squishiest, softest defensive fronts in all of football. They don't have a Brandon Williams, a Kenny Clark, a DJ Reader, like someone who can just get with a little bit of muscle into this middle of this defense, who can just say you're not running the football. They don't have that. They have good edge rushers. Obviously, Myles Garrett's one of the best edge rushers in football. But if you're running up the middle consistently, if you're sticking to those runs that the Ravens like to do, and that's where they were successful last week. That's why they got the run game going, is because Tyler Linderbaum had a great game. They had a great game from Ben Powers. They had a good game. They had a really good rotation working with TCC and Ben Powers at right guard, trying to substitute for Kevin Zeitler. Morgan Moses got off to a really poor start, but he really finished strong last time. And we know the impact of Ronnie Stanley in the run game. So I think this is going to be a very old school game. I do think Tyler Huntley can make a couple of throws, which is clearly different than something like what they were doing with Anthony Brown, where it's just like, just don't even put the ball in his hands, just let JK and Gus do their thing. But I think that's going to be the same mentality I want from the Ravens. Like, keep Tyler Huntley like in, just don't let him make mistakes. Let him throw the ball a little bit, but like if you're running the ball really well, don't do anything like that. Don't
Yeah,
do
yeah. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah, and I
yeah.
think that Steelers game, like, Cam Hayward was talking after the game about how, it was demoralizing. They could not stop the Ravens just hitting them in the mouth with their rushing attack. And so that is, that's both a physical and a psychological way of playing football. And I think that it's a real thing when the other team's offensive linemen are just launching at you, the defensive linemen or your linebackers, and you're just getting moved. You just feel powerless to stop them from moving, even if it's 4 or 5 yards up the field. Your job is to prevent them from getting 1 yard. And so you wear them down like that. And I think that that's where this game goes. I think the way Roman has a run game that is so perfectly dialed up to attack a run defense like this, because he can go after. I think more. I talked about this on Monday's pod. Morgan Moses has really sharpened up his pull blocks on some of these pull plays the Ravens run. Obviously, Stanley's phenomenal at it, and he'll be able to isolate and target Garrett and Clowney with pulling tackles, which is something that not a lot of coordinators do, but I think works really well for the Ravens in this game. And using, your big meteor guards and Powers and Zeitler, I think Zeitler will play, using your bigger guards and Zeitler and Powers to kind of to hit that first line on the defensive line and help Linderbaum release to the second level very quickly to get to those linebackers, I think is another thing that we're going to see a lot of in this game. And you mentioned early on that Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah isn't playing. The Browns inside linebacker, first round pick from last year, I believe, first rounder, right? Second rounder. He fell to that's right. He fell to the second round, and has played like basically an anti-Lamar Jackson. Like, really, really is the only player in the NFL who I think has done a credible job of shutting down Lamar Jackson as a runner, and obviously not shutting down, but slowing down Lamar as a runner. And he's not playing in this game, and obviously Lamar isn't either, but that's to me was the biggest threat to Huntley having open scrambling lanes, to Huntley having, the room he had against Pittsburgh. Part of that is because Pittsburgh doesn't have very good inside linebackers, and the ones that are that combine both athleticism and instinctiveness the way you need to stop Lamar. Well, the Browns don't have that outside of JOK either. And so I think that, Huntley taking what he can get from the offense, like, again, that's his game, taking what he can get, moving the defense or offense down the field however he can. That's, we're kind of opened up to do that. It's going to be another one of those ugly offensive games. There's going to be a lot of 3rd and 4s. There's going to be a lot of 4th and 2s. It's going to be another one of those games. There's really no way to sugarcoat that. But again, it's against a defense that, we're built to beat. We're built to take advantage of a defense in a situation like this. And, there's almost no one else at one other center right now for this than Tyler Huntley to figure out this specific matchup.
Yeah. It's just about, can they do what you just said, Nikhil? Can they realize what they have in front of them? Can they realize the front that they have in front of them? I think this is going to be a lot more successful running the ball than they were last time. I don't know what happened last time. Last time I need to go back and see what happened last time in terms of why the run game just wasn't working. When on paper, it should be an amazing matchup. I can imagine just Greg Roman licking his chops right now, thinking of all the stuff that he can do with the run game against this horrible front. Without JOK, without their best second level defender, being able to isolate the safeties that the Browns have. And we talk about not having JOK. The one thing I think that also does do is that if you get a big run and you get Tyler Linderbaum to the second level and he can make a block, you're going to be getting those 30, those big 25, 35 yard runs, because the Browns don't have a good linebacker who can stop that. Deion Jones is a name, but he's been terrible this year. He's been one of the worst linebackers in football. And we know that the Browns safeties have tackling issues. They don't really they're more coverage players. They're not really tacklers. And in terms of, I think some plays can get done through the air. I think Deshaun Jackson is going to have two pretty big catches. That's what he's kind of been for the Ravens. He's been their go-to guy for a big play. Sometimes he does just get lost in a secondary. But obviously with the secondary, it's the best part about the Browns defense outside of Myles Garrett, with a very bad receiving core. So it's the run game has to be the bread and butter for the Ravens.
Yeah, and again, this is a Browns defense that the Ravens are built to take advantage of. I think you play man against the Ravens, and Lamar's, their running game, their legs beat you. Huntley, that happened against the Steelers. The Steelers were playing man. They'd flood one side, and Huntley would literally just run to the other. It's like classic, like playground backyard football type stuff. All of my players are on one side, so I'm my receiver, so I'm gonna run to the other. It's like Madden. But I think that in a desire to slow down Huntley, the Browns are going to drop back into more zone. And I think that's where Deshaun Jackson and Demarcus Robinson come into play. They've already shown that chemistry with Tyler Huntley to sit down in zones and know where to be. And so I think that I think that deploying man is best against the Ravens receivers, but they don't really have anyone to counter Likely or Andrews with JOK out. They don't really have anyone, and even if they do, then they don't have one to spy on Tyler Huntley. And so those personnel deficiencies, I think, are just going to force the Browns into a good amount of zone on Saturday. And the Ravens are really built to take advantage of that. Some of their draws, like I think Greg Roman's going to bring out the draws a couple times on Saturday once he sees the Browns sitting back in coverage a little bit more on any of those like 3rd and 6 situations, I think, because the draws have worked really well for this team this year, actually. And so I also am just expecting that kind of Cleveland packing the box for a lot of the game and daring Tyler Huntley to throw. And the good thing is when that has happened in the past, he's put up a decent effort through the air. Now, again, it's a rough list of targets, which is why I think probably one of the biggest matchups, biggest parts of this game is going to be getting Isaiah Likely going. It's going to be hard to really rely on a lot from the outside receivers, but Likely being a big red zone target, I think the Ravens will be able to get down the field. But when the Browns just start throwing 8 in the box every single play, you're going to need that guy to show up. And I think that's where, Mark Andrews is getting double teamed every play. That's where the room has to be open for Isaiah Likely. And really, I think it's just going to come down to him making plays, making catches, right? We've seen too many drops this year already. And, he hasn't been too bad. I don't think he's been too responsible for those. But I don't want him to catch that bug early in Baltimore.
Yeah. Like I mentioned, sometimes you will get big plays from Deshaun Jackson, but again, relying on that is just something that like you just can't rely on at this point. And Isaiah Likely definitely has to be somebody that does have to step up. I will say last time the Ravens were in Cleveland, Mark Andrews went off. I still remember that one angry run he had when. Do you remember that, Nikhil? When like it was like a 40-yard run or something? Like the Browns secondary could not get him down.
Yeah, he was just bucking like a bronco. His legs were churning. He was high stepping, and they were just bouncing off. No one could really hang on to him.
Yeah, and I think plays like that are going to have to be part of this passing offense right now. You're going to need busted coverage. You're going to need it's like with the weapons and how bad they are, you're going to need just those moments. And when you do get those moments, you cannot miss. That's where I think the Ravens can survive this game is if they can cause a couple of turnovers, if they can be a hard running game offense that can take advantage of some mistakes by the Browns defense on the passing side, we think we get out of here with a win.
Yeah, I'm the more I've talked about it, the more I've been talking about you. The more I think this is a winnable game. The more I think the Ravens will win this game. Obviously, it's a winnable game, but I think that again, the matchups favor the Ravens. On the defensive side of the ball, I think that I think actually Brissett might be a better matchup for them on kind of the second go round. But obviously that's not what the Browns want to do. I just don't know if the processing is going to be there. The disguise blitzes that McDonald's going to send at Watson. I mean, Watson has been, he has missed this defensive renaissance in the NFL over the last 2 seasons with the expansion of the cover 2, the cover 6, quarter have, the different defenses that teams are throwing. There's a reason Patrick Mahomes is so far ahead of the league, and part of that is because he had to start adjusting to this last year because teams threw it at him first. Now Herbert and Allen and Tua, they're all getting thrown these new defensive schemes that are getting developed as specific counters. And Watson has just not been that that accustomed to it. He just hasn't had the same adjustment period. And I think that's another thing the Ravens have in their favor for this matchup, to generate a few turnovers. And again, those turnovers setting up the Ravens for positive field position is going to be, I think, a huge part of them getting points this game, because I don't think Huntley's going to lead multiple 80-yard drives to the end zone. I think he can probably pull off one. I think he's good for a touchdown. I think he's good for another one on a short field, and he's probably good for getting into field goal range once or twice more. But that's what, 17 points? That's got to be enough. I think if the offense gets you 17 points, the defense, like it's tight. It'll be a tight game, but I think that should be enough of a margin for the defense to get the rest of the job done. I mean, the Ravens have invested in this defense, and ultimately part of the reason they've done that is to be ready for this moment, right? To be ready for, oh shoot, we don't have Lamar. Okay, the world isn't over. The ship hasn't sunk.
Yeah, in terms of my predictions for this game, I was a little bit, in terms of the points, I was a little bit higher than you. I predicted a 27-10 victory, only because I think the run game is going to get really going. I do think if they can get one of those hashtag angry runs going, where like they do bust off a couple of big ones like they had against the Steelers, like Dobbins' big run, a couple of other big plays. I do think they can get into the end zone more. I still am very confident with this defense, even if I do think the tackling issues do kind of worry me a little bit, just because I do think that just last week they did kind of pop up, and it does sort of like it does kind of like in my back of my head, like, man, like they already had issues tackling Chubb beforehand. Obviously, I know Chubb's amazing, but like what if they have like a game like that again? But obviously, with Roquan here, with a much healthier defense, with the potential of getting a much better defense on the field against Watson, I just don't think the Ravens are gonna lose this game. Will it be close? Yes, but I do think the Ravens will pull away, because I do think those long runs and those mistakes by the Browns will be coming. I do think the Ravens will take advantage of them.
You know, I trust the Ravens. I love the Ravens, but I don't trust the devil inside the Ravens, and that devil shows up every single week, and they score fewer points than they should. And the fourth quarter, it's always like a 17-16 game, and so that's the prediction. I think I'll predict a 16-13 game. I do not think there's going to be a lot of points scored in this game. I think the Ravens defense will be very solid, and I think that it'll ultimately come down to that's a field goal, or that's 3 field goals and a touchdown. I think that the asking a much more out of this offense the way it is tough, because again, it's the run game. We know this. It's run versus pass, and the efficiencies and the chances of getting a high score with a dominant run game, are lower. But that doesn't necessarily mean your chances of winning the game with the dominant run game are lower. And so this team is, especially without Lamar Jackson, this team is kind of built to win ugly. And I think that's what it's going to be again on Saturday. Jared, thanks so much for joining me. As always, this was a blast. I love previewing these games when we get a chance. And we'll be back next week with a recap, hopefully after the Ravens bring home a win from Cleveland. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.